Welcome to Hochoka Podcast.
What would Sitting Bull and Bishop Marty talk about? Why does it matter? Hello, Mitaki Epi, and welcome to Hochoka here at the center of St. Joseph's Indian School's campus. I'm Scott Wooster, today's Hochoka host. We're glad you've joined our circle. And today we talk with Dr. Paul Monson, Associate Professor of Church History and Academic Dean at Sacred Heart Seminary and School of Theology near Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Sacred Heart and St. Joseph's Indian School are both apostolates of the Priests of the Sacred Heart, and Paul is here to learn about the Dahonian missions here in South Dakota, with the goal to eventually bring faculty and students here to learn from Lakota Catholics. In our first 2 seasons of Hochoka, we completed several podcasts aimed at bringing fresh perspectives to the relationship between Catholicism and Lakota spirituality. So we continue that theme with today's conversation. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you very much, Scott.
Yeah. It's good to have you here today. And can you just give our viewers an idea of your background and what brings you to be with us here today?
Yeah, so this is my first time here at St. Joseph's in Chamberlain. Come out here because I've always wanted to learn more about this particular apostolate of the Priests of the Sacred Heart, which was kind of its origins in the United States for the Dahonians. It's taken me a while to get out here.
Right.
And luckily I had a fall break to come out here. But also it dovetails nicely with my research interests in Bishop Marty as the first bishop of South Dakota, and also sort of his interaction with the Lakota Sioux, and particularly with Sitting Bull. But also St. Joe's is in a way kind of Marty's, in a way, part of his legacy, and sort of this dream of educating Lakota and also sort of building a sort of a Lakota Catholic community in the Dakotas. So, and then there's this. Personally, I'm originally from North Dakota, the other Dakota. They constantly confuse when I say people are from North Dakota. It's constantly, it's Black Hills, a beautiful area and all that. No, it's a different state.
Right.
Coming out here, it feels very much like home.
You're a professor of church history,
yes,
correct, and an administrator. You told me
regrettably, yes.
Yeah. But you teach church history, and obviously that's
and I continue to, yes.
And that's your passion.
Yeah, it is.
And this question might be too obvious, but what drew you to, in particular? I mean, there's a lot of things you could study in church history, but what drew you in particular to that connection between Marty and Sitting Bull?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually, as a kid, told myself I found North Dakota history horribly boring, and I wanted nothing to do with it. And so I went off to college and gained an interest in church history and historical theology. And I really decided I wanted to become a professor. I wanted to become a theology professor. And it was during college that I first I spent a summer at a place called St. Meinrad Arch Abbey down in southern Indiana. And I realized as a cradle Catholic, I didn't know the first thing about monks. And how they were different than these things we call friars, and what in the world is this all about? And there at St. Meinrad was this statue very large statue of Marty. And at the bottom it said sort of Vicar Apostolic of Dakota Territory. I'm from North Dakota. Why have I not heard of this guy? And so he was the first abbot of St. Meinrad, and I said, well, this might be someone I'm interested in. Then go on to graduate school, and I decide to focus on, specialize in the history of American Catholics. And I realized, actually, nobody's really talking about the contribution of monks and nuns to American Catholicism. There's some conversation, but it's sort of marginal. So, and I thought back on my experience of St. Meinrad, and Marty, that might be someone I should look into. So I devoted a dissertation on Marty, and particularly on how he had. So Marty originally came from Switzerland. Was born there in 1834. Then he comes to the United States in 1860, and he becomes the first. Begins his community, a Swiss Benedictine community, and becomes the first abbot there. And I focused on how he had adapted the rule of Saint Benedict as a Benedictine to the American scene. And my discovery, which sort of surprised me, was he's one of the first Benedictines to use the phrase ora et labora, which if you're in the Benedictine orbit, or even if you've just come in contact with them, they're all about prayer and work. But Benedictines don't use that phrase, actually, until the very late 19th century.
Okay.
Then it becomes kind of their motto. And so you go to Mount Marty College, or you go to Benedictine University, or whatever, they'll use ora et labora. But it's a very recent development. And here Marty is using it before we know anyone other Benedictine using it. And he's using it in letters actually from Dakota Territory when he first comes up here in 1876. And I thought this is fascinating. In the meantime, I'd sort of become interested in this latter half of Marty's life because of the controversy around Junipero Serra and his canonization back in 2015. And at that time, I was living in California, and I realized there was something to Marty's story that I hadn't really considered, which was, his interaction with the Lakota Sioux very much changed him. And instead of talking about how he had changed the Sioux, or had he converted the Sioux or Sitting Bull, what about how they transformed him? So, maybe I can take what I've done on my dissertation and sort of make that into and sort of whole volume 2, if you will, of that project as sort of a book. And so that's kind of what has brought me then to Marty, both in graduate work and then now sort of as a scholar.
Right.
So,
yeah, that's an interesting way to get there for sure.
Yeah, sorry, it's a little convoluted.
Yeah, sure is, but here we are, and it's obviously become a passion for you to study that as well, which is nice. Yeah, there's various stories about these two guys, and some of them might be considered rumors. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? So
Marty is well known in Catholic circles in South Dakota because he becomes the first bishop of Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Okay.
And he begins here in 1876, coming from this monastery in southern Indiana with the intention of building a monastery out here in the Dakotas, invited by the Bureau of Catholic Indian Missions to come out. The story of where him starts here, and then his legacy continues. There's a town named after him here in South Dakota, Marty. There's Mount Marty University down in Yankton. So his name is around here, and even here in St. Joe's, you have a stained glass window, and you have Marty there.
Right.
He comes in 1876. It's an important year. What happens is Marty goes in the aftermath of the Battle of Little Bighorn. Sitting Bull sort of flees with a group of the Lakota Sioux up to Canada. And it's there that he sort of is right across the border, present day sort of western Saskatchewan. And he's there until about 1881. But Marty, in less than a year having been at Standing Rock, sort of near present-day Bismarck and Fort Yates, in North Dakota, he gains a sense of just how restless sort of the Lakota Sioux are at Standing Rock. And he takes it upon himself he thinks he can actually broker a peace deal with the hostile Sioux in Canada and convince them to come back. And so he goes up there in this June of 1877. So this is almost a year after Battle of Bighorn. And he meets Sitting Bull. And this meeting actually makes Marty famous. He's the first American to approach Sitting Bull after that battle.
Okay.
And suddenly the world takes interest in Marty as sort of this ambassador to Sitting Bull. Mm-hmm. And then sort of two different stories emerge. One is you have Marty who very courageously goes and tries to not only be a peacemaker, but then also very much tries to convert Sitting Bull, and over the course of his time eventually does. At one point in Wikipedia, you could find under Sitting Bull that he became a Catholic, which is completely untrue.
Okay.
And then the other story is that Sitting Bull defiantly sort of rejects Marty's peace offering as absurd and points out just how naive this priest is. Mm-hmm. And very much rejects Catholicism and sort of is able to sort of defend, preserve to some degree traditional Lakota ways in the face of this brutal colonial system that Marty is a part of. Mm-hmm. And there's both sort of narratives are incomplete and problematic.
Right.
So I wouldn't. So and there are different generations of scholars who have sort of been interested in this story and tried to make sense of it. Mm-hmm. And it continues because then Marty goes back up in 1876, second time to meet Sitting Bull. Again, Sitting Bull refuses to come back down. And then 1881, Sitting Bull surrenders at Fort Buford, North Dakota. He is, which surprises Marty. Then he's imprisoned at Fort Randall, not far from here, in South Dakota.
Right, just south of here.
And Marty actually is partly instrumental in brokering sort of an agreement with the U.S. government for Sitting Bull to come back to Standing Rock. At one point, we're told that Marty actually brings a buffalo hide from Sitting Bull and presents to the Pope in Rome in 1885. And then the relationship kind of frays, and by the end, Sitting Bull and Marty really just don't see eye to eye on many things. And then Sitting Bull tragically dies in 1890. And Marty then continues on and dies in 1896. So I was sort of going deeper and deeper into the story as both men change. And Marty changes. But you have to understand him as a monk. And so the thing is that when we talk about missionaries, the idea is somebody like Pierre de Smet, who's also in the Stained Glass mm-hmm. Windows, right? Sort mm-hmm. of, this lone figure that kind of comes out into the wilderness and tries to convert the native, and we have continued to use this language in Catholicism of sort of being a missionary, sort of sharing the gospel and all that. Mm-hmm. But for Marty, as a Benedictine monk, nothing is done in isolation. Everything is communal. And so this kind of drew from my earlier research on Marty as a monk, both in Switzerland and then in Indiana, before I came to Dakota Territory, that he is, more than anything else, insistent that Benedictines do evangelization differently. They're not Jesuits. They don't go out alone. Mm-hmm. They create whole communities. And those communities have sort of a commitment to stability over time, over multiple generations, and create very much a family, a Christian family among the newly initiated. Mm-hmm. And that's what Marty originally brings to Dakota, to Standing Rock. Then he goes to meet Sitting Bull, and his language starts to change. This is where the historian gets really excited. When you mm-hmm. really look at the sources and you're trying to make sense of all of them. And then it realized, well, wait a minute, Marty is using the word not family anymore, because he kept using about the family, the Benedictine family, creating a double family of monks in Lakota. He has that line too. He keeps using the language of individual, Sitting Bull as an individual. We need to individualize the native. We need to appreciate the individuality of each Lakota, and his what he wanted to do was isolate Sitting Bull. When it was initial interaction, and Sitting Bull said, "Absolutely, I'm not coming back to the United States." Marty wanted to sort of separate Sitting Bull from other Lakota Sioux in exile in Canada, and his main concern was that Sitting Bull might be sort of insistent on these traditional ways, but not all Sioux are. And so maybe we understand that, then we see them as individuals, then there's sort of hope for this idea he has. And so there's a change in Marty, and it's gradual, and as he continues to get to know Sitting Bull, there's kind of this back and forth where you see when he's hopeful about Sitting Bull, he kind of falls back on sort of his Benedictine optimism, emphasizing sort of the communal nature of Catholicism. And then when Sitting Bull frustrates him, he becomes more, he's just an individual that you can put off to the side. And over time, this, like I said, this relationship has sort of, it's not just one nice sort of easy story to tell. It weaves back and forth. Sitting Bull seems to show some interest in Catholicism in 1883 when after he comes back from Fort Randall. He's actually even part of a Corpus Christi procession, a Eucharistic procession. And then Sitting Bull, my take is once he ends up going on the Wild West shows with Cody and sort of sees American cities, he kind of becomes disgusted with with white culture, and say, I'm not going to do anything with Christianity.
Right.
And Sitting Bull and Marty, just again, their sort of relationship fractures. But then something really strange happens. When Sitting Bull then is tragically murdered, shot, in 1890, Marty's tone changes, and it's first kind of difficult to make sense of, but you have Sitting Bull's death, and then you also have the tragedy of Wounded Knee, all in that winter. And Marty notices that there's suddenly an interest among the Lakota Sioux of Standing Rock and other reservations in South Dakota and North Dakota in Catholicism. And he attributes this to the fact that Sitting Bull is no longer there, which is in a way kind of really uncomfortable. So because Sitting, so Marty comes up then. His solution is actually draws him back to his Benedictine roots, where he suggests sort of this idea of this Sioux Catholic Congress in 1891 as a way to sort of bring the Sioux together from all the different reservations. Because Marty can't quite understand Sitting Bull sort of distracts Marty in a way from his initial sort of vision. And it's a story where so my overall take is it's almost kind of a tragedy, because Marty and Sitting Bull, in terms of this monk's idea of sort of a family, as a family not in a biological sense, but a family that is sort of goes transcends by just sort of the nuclear family, a family that is based off of a sort of larger sense of kinship, actually has a lot more in common with the Lakota idea of the Tiashpie. But Marty could not appreciate that at the time. And it's only later with the Lakota, the Sioux Catholic Congresses, that the Lakota themselves sort of realize this connection with Catholicism. And even though Marty gets credit, it's for starting it. It actually goes, and he does start it, I suppose, but the ownership really, Lakota take ownership of it, Lakota Catholics, and it then leads to today that there's a sort of an arc from the Sioux Catholic Congresses then to the Tekakwitha conferences.
So why does all of this matter now, or what is it? How does it inform the church today, and what does it say to Lakota people? In
terms of sort of what it especially says to sort of, I think, the relationship between Lakota spirituality and Catholicism today is, well, first of all, that, and this has been better appreciated by scholars in the past 50 years, is, it's not, the story is never as simple as sort of Christianity or a white culture comes in and sort of completely decimates the native culture. There's this negotiation that happens. There's also some, if you look carefully, even in the missionary sources, you can see not just how they change, but how there's this pushback, and this native culture, this indigenous culture, sort of gradually making this. Some reject it, some sort of make it their own. But I think there's something really fascinating with Marty's story in relation to Sitting Bull, because, like I said, there's, from the hindsight of 100 years later, I think we can appreciate a lot more sort of the complementarity between Lakota culture and spirituality and its stories and Christianity and Catholicism. Marty really couldn't appreciate that. It was kind of either or for him. And even though you see these changes in his life, he never quite understands that. But there's a sort of lesson in Marty's story with Sitting Bull, in that someone as a monk should have been able to see that relationship better and failed to. And it's easy sort of for us to recognize that. But it should also sort of, at least for me as a Catholic and a scholar, to sort of ask myself, like, when do our own values not actually inform or help us inform or assess this foreign situation, this sort of radical encounter like he had with Sitting Bull that you can't quite make sense of, and you don't sort of fall back on those what you hold so dear, like Marty did, as the family model of being a monk, and appreciate that in the Lakota Tiashpie.
And you said you're working on a book right now.
Yes.
And I understand we'll be able to maybe read that soon.
I hope so. Yeah. The book will happen.
Right.
It's taken on a life of its own, and I've become more and more comfortable with that because instead of just talking about sort of a specific interaction between two historical figures, there are sort of larger lessons here that I'm still trying to sort of wrestle with,
right,
and let's sort of unfold
and be able to learn for yourself, and then be able to present to us, which is great. And it's not your dissertation anymore, is it? It's
no, thank God.
It's a whole different thing. But it trying to remove blind spots. In 100 years, we have the benefit of hindsight, and we know a lot of things that Marty wouldn't have known back at that point. So with your research and the history, the study that you've done, I look forward to being able to read that book and to understand that, and hopefully that does move us ahead. But I thank you for sharing about the book and sharing about Bishop Marty, Monk Marty, would you say?
I mean, he becomes a bishop.
Yeah.
So it's Bishop Marty now. But
and Sitting Bull and their relationship, which I think is great. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate
Absolutely.
it very much.
And thanks for helping us understand that bridge between Catholicism and Lakota spirituality a little bit better too. And thank you to everyone that joined us here in Ho-Chokeh at the center of St. Joseph's Indian Schools campus, where we talk about issues central to Native American education today. And until next time, stay centered.